Commander Zalera Okonkwo had seen a lot of strange things in her 14 years with the United Earth Defense Directorate. She had watched a rogue asteroid crack apart over Jupiter's upper atmosphere like a split walnut. She had once piloted a damaged frigate through a plasma storm off the Martian poles using nothing but manual thrust and a broken navigation array. But nothing, not one moment in her career, had prepared her for the morning the Vrethkai Empire decided to say hello. The signal came in on the subquantum band at 0412 station time, cutting through every jamming protocol and encryption layer Kestrel 9 possessed as if those defenses were made of wet paper. Senior Signals Officer Davi Machado nearly knocked his coffee globe across the operations room when every screen simultaneously turned a deep, pulsing violet. "Commander," Davi called, his voice doing its best to stay professional and almost managing it, "I'm reading a broadcast originating approximately 42 light-minutes sunward. It is addressing us by name. By Earth's name." Zalera set down her mission report and crossed the room in 4 long strides, pulling herself into the observer's harness beside the main console. The violet display resolved into a shape, tall, angular, built like a cathedral that had decided to become a living creature. It had 4 upper limbs that split at the elbow into branching clusters of fingers, a torso plated in what looked like natural armor grown from its own body, and eyes arranged in a horizontal band across the upper third of its head, each one a shifting amber that moved independently. Behind it, partially visible, was a bridge that made Kestrel 9 look like a garden shed. The translation algorithm, humanity's best piece of xenolinguistic software, 2 decades in development, processed the signal and spat out text within 11 seconds. The voice that accompanied it was a deep, layered sound, like several instruments playing in imperfect harmony. Organic designation, Earth humans. Classification, Prestellar, Grade 3 civilization, threat index negligible. I am Fleet Sovereign Veth Orlin of the Vrethkai Dominion, 7th arm of the Galactic Imperative. You occupy a resource corridor classified under Dominion Survey 7th Alan 9. You have 48 of your planetary rotations to vacate your home system entirely. Non-compliance will result in systemic reclamation. Systemic reclamation. The translation note at the bottom of the screen, added automatically by the algorithm, read: likely equivalent, erasure of all present life forms and infrastructure for raw material processing. Zalera stared at the screen for a long time. Then she unclipped her harness, floated back to her desk, and opened a priority channel to Earth. "Get me Director General Haruto Sekigawa," she said. "Tell him it's the kind of problem that doesn't have a polite solution." On Earth, the news hit governments within hours and the public within days. There was panic, naturally. There were protests, prayer circles, mass migrations toward rural areas by people who seemed to feel that distance from cities would help. There were philosophers who called it a transcendent moment and economists who tried to calculate what 48 hours of global productivity loss would cost. But in the deep bunkers beneath Geneva, in the orbital command rings above the Pacific, and in the quiet research stations scattered across the asteroid belt, a very different kind of response was already assembling itself. Not from fear. From something altogether more dangerous. From curiosity. Dr. Yemisi Adara Blunt, chief xenotechnologist at the Institute for Non-Terrestrial Systems, was the first to say it out loud in an official capacity. She pulled up the Vrethkai transmission on her lab wall, paused it on the image of Fleet Sovereign Veth Orlin's ship, and began annotating. "The hull plating uses a crystalline lattice structure," she told her team, 9 scientists who had been awake for 31 hours straight. "The energy emissions around the drive section suggest a folded space compression drive, probably 4th or 5th generation. The weapons ports, I count 17 visible on this angle alone, fire something plasma adjacent but with a coherence pattern I've never seen. This ship is extraordinary." She paused. "And it has approximately 112 design vulnerabilities that I can identify from a single image." Her assistant, a young engineer named Tobias Fenn, looked up from his own screen. "Are you saying we can beat them?" Yemisi pulled off her glasses and polished them thoughtfully. "I'm saying we can do considerably better than that. I'm saying we can embarrass them." The 48-hour clock ticked onward. Earth did not flee. Earth got to work. Director General Haruto Sekigawa had not slept in 36 hours and he was beginning to feel it in the way that only total exhaustion can feel, not like tiredness, but like the world had been replaced with a slightly less convincing version of itself. The Geneva Orbital Ring's main strategy chamber held 47 of humanity's best minds, projected in via holoconference from locations across the solar system. Haruto could see Admiral Priya Vasanthan from her command post on the lunar defense grid, white-haired and straight-backed, expression carved from the same granite that had made her the most decorated officer in the fleet. He could see General Dominic Osei Frempong from the Mars Strategic Command, massive hands folded on the table before him, watching everything and saying nothing, which in Haruto's experience meant he was already 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. And he could see Dr. Yemisi Adarablunt, who had apparently not bothered to go home between her last briefing and this one and was wearing the same clothes, surrounded by even more screens, each showing a different component of the Vrethkai vessel they'd been studying for the last day and a half. "Let me summarize where we are," Haruto said, calling the room to attention. "The Vrethkai Empire has given us 48 hours. We have used 22 of those hours productively. Dr. Adarablunt, status." Yemisi stood, pulling up a holographic model of the enemy flagship that now rotated above the conference table like a slow, lethal planet. "The Vrethkai operate on a centralized command model. That ship is the Fleet Sovereign's personal command vessel and also the communications hub for their entire battle group. We count 31 support ships, 14 fighter carrier classes, and 6 what I'm calling dreadnought analogs. All of them relay through the flagship for coordinated tactical targeting." She highlighted a section near the ship's midsection. "Here. This is their subquantum relay core. It is, as far as I can determine, completely unshielded on the ventral side, I suspect because nothing in their threat catalog has ever gotten underneath them. Can we exploit that?" Admiral Vasanthan asked. "We already have a prototype. I've been building it for the last 19 hours with teams at 5 different research stations. We're calling it the Ghost Spike, a single-shot subquantum disruptor that doesn't need to penetrate the hull. It transmits through space itself. At close enough range, it collapses their relay core from the outside." The room was quiet. "And close enough range is," Haruto began. 1,200 kilometers. "Yes, I know. We need to get one of our vessels to within 1,200 kilometers of a ship that would eat our entire fleet for a mid-morning snack." General Osei Frempong finally spoke. His voice was low and deliberate, the kind of voice that had been trained over decades to carry weight without needing volume. "We have the Meridian." Several people in the room shifted uncomfortably. Haruto knew why. The UES Meridian was not a warship. It was a science and exploration vessel, the crown jewel of the UEDD's deep space program, fast, quiet, equipped with the most advanced sensor suite humanity had ever built, but armed with nothing more than a pair of point defense turrets intended for debris clearance. Sending the Meridian toward the Vrethkai flagship was not a military action. It was something between a gamble and an insult, which was precisely why it might work. "Their threat index algorithm classified us as grade 3 negligible threat," Haruto said slowly, beginning to see the shape of what Dominic was proposing. "They won't be watching for a single unarmed science vessel moving toward them under a standard exploration profile. They'll think we're either surrendering, scouting, or too primitive to understand that we shouldn't approach," Dominic confirmed. "By the time they reevaluate, it will be over." The plan was assembled in 4 hours. Every element of it was, by any reasonable military doctrine, absurd. A science ship as the primary weapon. A weapon that had been invented in under 20 hours. A targeting solution that required the pilot to manually hold position for 11 seconds under the likely fire of a battle group that could reduce planets to slag. Captain Rennick Thalos, who had been quietly sitting at the far end of the conference table this entire time, was the one who volunteered to fly the Meridian. He was 31 years old, had spent the last 4 years cataloging gas giant weather systems in the outer solar system, and had the kind of face that looked permanently surprised, as if the universe kept doing things he hadn't expected. He raised his hand and said simply, "I know that ship better than I know my own quarters. And I'm faster in her than anyone. Tell me what I need to do." Haruto looked at him for a long moment. "Get some sleep first," he said. "You fly in 14 hours. The Meridian was a beautiful ship. Rennick Thalos had always thought so, even when other pilots teased him about being assigned to a science vessel. It was long and graceful, built for endurance over aggression, with a sensor array that fanned out from the bow like the petals of some enormous metal flower. It had no business being here. Rennick made himself breathe slowly as he monitored his approach. At his shoulder, relayed via tight beam comm from Geneva Orbital, was the voice of Dr. Yemisi Adarablunt, who had apparently appointed herself his personal mission support and would not be talked out of it. 60,000 kilometers, she said. "Their sensors have certainly picked you up by now. What's their response?" "Nothing yet." Rennick watched his passive detection array. "That's actually more unnerving than if they'd fired. They think you're insignificant. Use it." Easy to say from Geneva Orbital. Rennick adjusted his vector slightly, angling the meridian along what his navigation system calculated as the most natural approach arc for a vessel of this type under its standard mission profile. He had spent the last 3 hours studying the Vrethkai's broadcast again, watching the fleet sovereign's posture, his tone. The calm of an empire that had never once been threatened by anything it considered beneath it. The dangerous arrogance of total certainty. At 40,000 kilometers, the Vrethkai finally responded. Not with weapons. With a hail. The translation algorithm rendered it in under 5 seconds. Designation: Small Earth Vessel. You are in violation of approach restrictions to Dominion flagship Ascendant of All Stars. Withdraw or be destroyed. Rennick opened the response channel. This is Captain Rennick Thalas of the United Earth Science Vessel Meridian. We are on a standard observation approach. We received your transmission and we are attempting to open a formal diplomatic channel. We mean no hostility. He sent it and watched the clock. 6-second delay for transmission at this range. Another few seconds for their translation. Then however long it took Fleet Sovereign Veth Orlin to decide what to make of one extremely small ship full of what his empire classified as primitives asking politely not to be shot. The response came back. You are noted. Maintain current speed and do not adjust heading. Any deviation will be interpreted as aggression. In other words, we see you, we have weapons pointed at you, and we find you too trivial to destroy right now, but will correct that if you annoy us. Perfect. Rennick maintained speed and did not adjust his heading. He also, very quietly, adjusted his course by precisely the 0.003 degree increment required to begin shaving distance from the flagship's ventral approach corridor. Not a sharp course change. Just the kind of gentle drift that could be attributed to solar wind compensation or instrument calibration. The kind of drift a Grade 3 civilization might not even realize they were making. Behind the main console in the science bay that had been converted, badly, with zero elegance and full functionality, into a weapons housing, the Ghost Spike sat waiting. It looked nothing like a weapon. It looked like a sensor calibration tool with 2 extra components bolted on, which was essentially what it was. Yemisi had said it would work. Rennick had decided to believe her, partly because the alternative was too unpleasant to consider. At 20,000 kilometers, a second Vrethkai vessel moved to parallel position off the Meridian's port side. Not firing. Watching. They've sent a shadow, Rennick reported. Expected, Yemisi replied. It's actually helpful, means the flagship hasn't elevated your threat status. If they genuinely thought you were dangerous, you'd have a weapons lock, not a babysitter. Keep going. 15,000. 10,000. Rennick felt the peculiar crystalline calm that had always come to him in the most dangerous moments of his career. Not the absence of fear, he was absolutely afraid, but fear translated into a kind of sharpened focus, every thought arriving clean and precise. He thought about the people on Earth. 7 billion of them. The ones who were scared. The ones who were praying. The ones, he suspected, who were in workshops and labs still trying to find more solutions in case this one failed. Humans, he had always thought, were at their most extraordinary not when things were easy but when there was absolutely no reason to believe they should succeed. 14,000 kilometers. The Ghost Spike's targeting system locked on. 12,000. 11 seconds. All he had to do was hold position for 11 seconds. He held position. The Ghost Spike fired. There was no visible beam, no dramatic flash. The subquantum disruptor operated on a level below the electromagnetic spectrum, carrying its signal not through space but through the quantum substrate beneath it. A whisper through the foundations of the universe, targeted at a single, precise component 11,800 kilometers away. The effect, however, was visible enough. Every screen on the Meridian sensor array lit up simultaneously as the Vrethkai flagship Ascendant of All Stars went dark. Not completely, the hull still held, the atmosphere within was presumably still breathable, and no one aboard was physically harmed. But every system that passed through the subquantum relay core stopped. Weapons targeting. Intership communications. Coordinated fire control. Navigation synchronization across the fleet. The entire mechanism by which 31 ships functioned as a single coherent military force, gone, in the span of a millisecond. Rennick sat in the silence of his own bridge and watched the fleet scatter. Not in panic. These were trained soldiers of an empire that had presumably conquered dozens of civilizations. They held formation. But they held formation independently, each ship operating blind without the flagship's coordination, and 31 ships operating blind independently was very different from 31 ships operating as a single fleet. They were, for the next unknown number of hours, 31 separate problems instead of one overwhelming one. Back on Earth, in the Geneva orbital ring, the strategy chamber erupted in something that was not quite cheering and not quite crying and was probably both at once. Commander Zalera Okonkwo, patched in from Kestrel 9, watched her own sensor readouts update and felt something she had not felt since this whole impossible situation began. The specific, clean relief of a person who has just watched the worst possible outcome fail to happen. It lasted approximately 4 minutes. Then Fleet Sovereign Veth Orlin got on a backup communications channel, older technology, slower but functional, and said 7 words that the translation algorithm rendered as, "You have chosen a path of consequence." The backup channel, Yemisi noted immediately, did not route through the disabled relay core. It was a direct analog transmission short range, designed for exactly this kind of contingency. The Fleet Sovereign was angry clearly. But he was also still alive, still in command of a battle group that could operate independently if it had to, and now operating with updated information. Earth was not grade 3. Earth was not negligible. Earth had, in under 24 hours, developed and deployed a weapon that had never existed before specifically to counter Vrethkai technology. This was, Haruto realized, the most dangerous moment. Not before. No. A wounded empire with damaged pride and 31 warships. He opened the response channel himself this time, from the Geneva orbital ring, direct to the flagship. Fleet Sovereign Veth Orlin, this is Director General Haruto Sekigawa, head of the United Earth Defense Directorate. We did not initiate this confrontation. You told us to leave our home system and called our erasure a reclamation. We chose a different option. We chose to demonstrate that we are capable of defending ourselves without destroying you in return. He paused. Your fleet is operational. Your crew is unharmed. Your ship will recover full function within an estimated 6 hours once your engineering teams restore the relay core. We have transmitted the repair specifications to your backup channel. This was not an act of war. It was an introduction. Silence from the flagship. Long enough that people in the strategy chamber began exchanging glances. Then the Fleet Sovereign's voice came back. Slower this time. Something had shifted in those layered harmonics, not softened exactly but recalibrated. You transmitted repair specifications. Yes. To an enemy who had just threatened your homeworld. You're not our enemy unless you choose to be. We'd prefer you didn't. Another silence. Shorter. This is not a response pattern that exists in our classification system for grade 3 civilizations. Haruto almost smiled. I imagine it isn't. We're happy to explain how we work if you're interested. We find that conversation tends to go better than the alternative, and we've had a lot of practice at difficult conversations. General Ose Frempong, watching from the far end of the chamber, leaned back in his chair and allowed himself an expression that on anyone else would have been a smile. On his face it looked like a mountain deciding it was satisfied with its positioning. Dr. Adara Blunt, still at her station surrounded by screens, was already pulling up a new analysis window, beginning to map the secondary systems of the Vrethkai fleet. Not as weapon targets. As things she wanted to understand. The conference chamber aboard the Meridian had not been designed for hosting diplomatic negotiations with a multi-species galactic empire. It was designed for 12 scientists to review geological survey data over coffee. Rennick had done what he could with it, borrowed a table from the cargo bay, replaced the overhead lights with a broader spectrum configuration after learning that Vrethkai visual perception extended into the near ultraviolet, and put 3 extra atmospheric processors in the corridor outside because apparently the Fleet Sovereign's personal atmosphere requirements included a slightly elevated nitrogen mix. He thought Yemisi would have loved it. She was not here. She had been specifically requested not to attend, on the grounds that during the preliminary communications over the past 6 weeks she had sent the Vrethkai engineering team 47 unsolicited technical questions about their drive systems and they had found it overwhelming. Yemisi had accepted this decision gracefully and then sent 48 questions to Haruto instead, with the request that he work them into the conversation naturally. Haruto arrived aboard the Meridian that morning looking like a person who had aged 2 years and 6 weeks and was somehow more settled for it. He shook Rennick's hand, accepted coffee, and stood at the observation port for a few minutes looking at the Vrethkai ships holding station 500 kilometers off the bow. How are you feeling? Rennick asked. Like I'm about to have the most important conversation in human history over a cargo bay table in a science vessel that smells like recycled air and ambition, Haruto said. Which is actually appropriate, I think. The Vrethkai delegation arrived via a shuttle that made the Meridian look like a footstool. 3 of them. Fleet Sovereign Veth Orlin himself, taller in person than any recording had suggested, nearly 2.5 meters, those amber eyes in their horizontal band shifting constantly, tracking everything, and two aides who stood at quiet attention and said nothing for the entirety of the meeting. The translation algorithm ran on both sides now, a modified version that Yemisi and a Vrethkai linguist named Sivalorithkin, who had been conducting their own parallel enthusiastic technical exchange and had apparently formed a professional friendship of enormous mutual incomprehension and delight, had developed together over the past month. Haruto and the fleet sovereign sat across the cargo bay table from each other and began. It was not a simple conversation. Veth Orlin explained the Galactic Imperative, the Empire's 3,000-year program of resource classification and civilization cataloging, the genuine shock at encountering a Grade 3 world that had responded to a standard reclamation notice not with flight or feudal resistance but with something the Vrethkai had no classification for at all. He used a word that Sivalorithkin had given the algorithm as defiant creative collaborative. A single word in Vrethkai covering a concept that apparently required 3 English words and still wasn't quite right. We have encountered, the fleet sovereign said slowly, 11 civilizations at the Grade 3 threshold in our history. 9 of them fled. 2 attempted armed resistance and were reclaimed. You are the first 2, he paused, the layered voice searching for the right construction. Explain yourselves to us while simultaneously making our flagship unusable. We didn't want to destroy anything, Haruto said. We wanted to demonstrate that we could, without actually doing it. There's a difference that matters very much to us. I begin to understand this. It is strange. It's worked reasonably well for us historically. Not always, but often enough. They talked for 6 hours. About the Galactic Imperative and its survey maps. Maps that Haruto politely pointed out covered a vast territory of space that humanity had its own plans for exploring, which led to a careful and surprisingly collegial negotiation about shared access corridors. About the 14 other civilizations currently under various stages of Dominion classification. About what Grade 3 actually meant in Vrethkai terms and what it missed, which turned out to be quite a lot once you applied it to a species that had, in the 48 hours of an impossible deadline, invented a new category of weapon and then chosen not to weaponize it fully. Veth Orlin, near the end of the meeting, looked at Rennick, who had been sitting quietly to one side, technically a ship's captain but really Rennick suspected, because Haruto wanted someone there who had actually been in the moment, and said, "You flew the ship that disabled us. You were afraid." It was not a question. Rennick answered honestly. Yes. But you held your position. Yes. The fleet sovereign was quiet for a moment. In the Dominion, fear is classified as a weakness indicator. A civilization that feels fear is considered unstable, unpredictable, controllable through sufficient threat generation. We have built our diplomacy on this principle for 3,000 years. Pause. I find I may need to revise some documentation. Rennick almost laughed. He kept it to a smile. Fear kept me honest, he said. It made sure I took it seriously. I think that's what it's for. The meeting ended with something that the Vrethkai did not have a standard protocol for and humans had been doing for thousands of years. A handshake. Haruto offered his hand. Veth Orlin studied it, consulted quietly with one of his aides, and then reached across the table with 2 of his branching-fingered upper limbs and enclosed Haruto's hand in something that was approximately a handshake if you allowed that a handshake could also be a gesture of precise and dignified reevaluation. When the Vrethkai shuttle detached and made its way back to the flagship, Rennick and Haruto stood at the observation port and watched it go. So, Rennick said, "What happens now?" Haruto sipped his coffee, which had gone cold 2 hours ago. Now we update the survey maps, negotiate 14 other civilization situations with the Dominion, figure out what a mutual access resource corridor treaty looks like in interstellar law, and explain to Yemisi that she may send her technical questions to Sivalorithkin directly and they will correspond without limit. And the rest of the Galactic Imperative? The other Vrethkai? The wider galactic community? Haruto was quiet for a moment. Word will spread. It always does. That there's a Grade 3 civilization in the Sol system that did something no one had a category for. That'll bring interest, and some of that interest will be threatening, and some will be curious and we'll have to deal with all of it. He turned from the window. But we've dealt with hard things before. That's not arrogance, it's just history. We're frightened, we make something extraordinary, and then we try to talk to each other about what it means. He put down his coffee cup. It's what we do. In the Science Bay, Dr. Yemisi Adarablunt's first direct message to Sivalorithkin was already 49 questions long and growing. Among the stars, something new had begun.